Hi everyone, it's Jeanette here from the Sewing Studio with, as promised, another scrappy binding. Now if you saw the pinwheel pumpkins, I promised in that one that I would show how to do another scrappy binding, but it's slightly different than the first one. The first scrappy binding tutorial we did, which we'll put a link to, we did straight seams because I started off simple. So the measurements, the maths wasn't quite as complicated and we were just doing straight seams. But we had some comments and questions and I thought actually this was an ideal opportunity because I was doing this project and I wanted to do scrappy binding. I was making this with a scrap bag, and if you haven't seen that tutorial, we'll put a link to that as well, how to make this block and how to get it to this point. And I got it all quilted and I was using all my lovely sort of Halloween fabrics for this one. And I thought we would just finish it off together with the second version of a scrappy binding where we do a mitered seam. Now the maths for this is a little bit trickier in the fact that actually the seam allowances you need to add in are slightly different, but that is the only difference. Now for this size, and this ended up being sort of 40 inches by about 14 1/4, I worked out that you need at least 112 inches of binding to go all the way around. And just to get that, it is just a simple matter of adding up and measuring sort of the lengths of your sides and adding that all together. And then I normally add about 6 inches to that just to add for any sort of leeway that needs to be there and sort of finishing off, overlapping it at the end. Now for me, I had 7 different fabrics, I believe, and I needed to get to 112 inches. So I worked out that I needed to cut at least 19-inch pieces from each of my 7 fabrics. Now sometimes I had a piece of fabric that might have been slightly shorter, so you know I can sort of make up for that, like we did in the first video with the end bits, because the only 2 bits I don't cut to size are the starter pieces and the end pieces. So I've left them long, so they're bigger than my 19 inches. Now that 19 inches is worked out by the circumference of the runner, but then for every seam you need to add 2.5 inches. So my binding is 2.5 inches wide, so when you do a mitered seam you lose in that seam 2.5 inches, so sort of 1 1/4 inches from each fabric basically. So you need to add in all of those. Now for this there were 6 mitered seams, so I knew I needed to add 15 inches to the size of my strips to get to my 112 inches. I hope that made sense and I haven't confused anybody too much. Now quite often when I do a scrappy binding, I don't do the maths, I just keep adding strips and keep measuring it until I've got a piece that's long enough. So if that's easier for you, by all means do that. But I thought for those people that are more mathematically and like to know precise measurements for this, that's how I got to that figure and that's how you work it all out. So I've started to join my strips here. I tend to lay them out in the order I think I want to put them, just to sort of make sure I get a nice balance of where all the sort of the lights, the darks, the colours, sort of a nice spread of everything. So I've already started to join this just so we didn't spend a lot of time sewing lots of seams. But I thought I would show you 2 ways of adding, of how you do that mitered seam. Now this is my starter strip, and as I said, I've left that long. This is my end strip. I've also left that long. I won't cut these until I've actually sewn it on, and then I'll know what I need to cut them to right at the very end. So let me just set that one aside for a minute and we'll work on this one. Now the first way I'm going to show you of doing that mitered seam is using a ruler, which is called the folded corner clipper. Now it wasn't until, I don't know how many years ago, maybe a couple of years ago, that I came across this little ruler and found that I couldn't live without it. Well, I can, but I don't want to, because it actually makes the binding so much easier, so much easier. And I'm all for easy, wherever I can get it, basically. So this is perfect for actually doing a mitered seam on binding. So this is just a little one, it's 5 inches. But what really makes the difference here are these, what I call these little upticks here. And that's what helps give us the guide of where we need to place it on the fabric, which you don't have with any other sort of half square triangle ruler, unless your half square triangle ruler has little upticks that go up the side here. So basically all we need to do on that to make our mitered seam, this is 2.5 inches wide. The fabric I was using was from a scrap bag, a Halloween scrap bag. All I'm going to do is line up my 2.5 inch line And you see there that little uptick, that goes on the edge of the fabric. So I know that that is my perfect mitered cut there. That includes a seam allowance. So that's my little bit of waste that I'm going to lose from that. Now this is the strip I'm joining it to, and the only thing you have to watch with this is that you cut it the same. So you don't want any of your fabrics, everything needs to be right side up. Now I'm right-handed, so I'm cutting from right to left. If you were left-handed, you would just be coming in from the other way, but you need to make sure that your cuts on these are the same. So once again, 2.5 inches, 2.5 inch line on the ruler here with a little uptick, and 2.5 inches there. And then we're going to cut that off. So what that means now is when we put that way, these two will fit together perfectly. So it just makes life so simple. So I normally just go through all my middle pieces. You have to cut both ends, but exactly the same. Just make sure that the fabric is pointing the same and the angles are going in the same. So on the other end, we're not going to use the ruler. If you haven't got the ruler, I will show you how to do it. So this is my end strip, and all I'm going to do on this one is lay them down so that they sort of cross over each other. Now I tend to do it so there's a little bit sort of sticking up at the top. I just find it a little bit easier. So let's get our pins and just put a pin maybe there to hold it. I'm trying to put the pin where it's not going to be in the way, because what we need to do now is draw a line. Let me bring this in under the close-up so you can see. I'm going to draw a line from where those 2 points meet there. Let's get right in the centre. So we've got that there and that there. So right from there, I don't know how well you can see that red on red, and where those two fabrics, so where this corner comes out, so where they meet there. So if I just push that pin up a little bit. So that's the 2 points I'm joining. And we're going to sew on that line. So on this one without the ruler, we're going to sew on the line. Let's go to the other end. And on this one where we've cut it with the ruler, we're going to do a normal 1/4 inch seam. So let's do that one first. And what I normally do is cut them all, pin them all, and then you can just chain piece them through. Now I'm not going to cut the thread because I don't need to. I can just find the other end. And on this one, and you can see I had the rest of the binding, which is falling off the table, face up, and this bit has gone face down on top of it. And we're going to sew on that line. So let's just clip that and clip the connecting thread there. And let's just have a look at those seams and just make sure that everything is lining up, and I'm happy with that. So let's go to our other end and make sure that everything is lining up there. Now I'm a little bit off there, but I'm lining up there. So that might just be a pressing. So I think I'm happy enough with that. If it's a little bit off, don't worry, because it will come out in the seam. It's if you've got like a big stair step there, you need to worry. But I think by the time I press that with the iron, that should be fine. And I press these seams open. Now, once again, because we've cut that on a 45 degree, we've got a bias edge, so there will be stretch. So we want to be pressing. We don't want to be moving our iron too much. We're just going to let the heat of the iron do its work there. And then on the other side. There we are, perfect. Well, I say perfect. You know I don't mean perfect. Right, now while we're here at the iron, what I'm going to do is, actually start at the other end, it'll be easier, Jeanette. Fold this whole strip in half. So this will just take a minute or two, so I'll probably get put into fast motion. So there it all is. So we're going to do what we did last time with the scrappy binding, in that I'm going to put it around and do a dry run just to make sure that none of those seams, but let me just show you that mitered seam there. So you can see we've distributed the bulk, and if I just open that up actually, you can see that that seam is going over a much wider length of the binding. So it means that it's distributing that bulk across all of that length on there. But I don't want any of those seams or any part of those seams to be hitting a corner, because that will give us funny, funky looking corners, and we don't want funky corners. So what I always do is a little dry run. It doesn't really matter where you start and stop on any of the scrappy bindings, because you can't really tell. I'm going to start about halfway along. So let's just judge where that first one is going to be. Let's try it about there. See how we go. Ooh, so let's bring the pins over closer. I'm just going to pin or clip. Clips are sometimes a bit easier if you've got clips for this bit, but I'm just going to go round. And when I get to my corner, I'm going to show you how we're going to do the corners. I'm going to do this on the machine. Let's just pull it into the close-up. So I'm lining this raw edge up with the raw edge of the runner. Let me just pin that there. And then we're going to take this strip straight up so that this raw edge lines up with this raw edge now, and this should be at a 45-degree angle. Let me show you that again. That edge is lining up with that edge, and we've got a 45-degree angle there. And then we're going to bring the binding down. And then that fold should match with that edge. This raw edge should match with the raw edge of the runner, and then you've got these two folded edges that should sit neatly on top of each other. And if you've got all of those match points done on the front, you'll have a nice mitered corner on the front, because I think one of the comments we had was they can't always get a nice mitered corner on the back. And that may be because you haven't actually got all your match points very well there. So if you've got excess fabric up here, it won't quite work out right. You need to have those three match points all set, and then on the back your mitre should come out fine. So quite often the problem might not be on the back where you're making the mitre, it might be how you've made the mitre in the first place. Now that said, it might not be, because there are a couple of little tips and tricks I can give you. Now that you see, now already we're hitting another seam, so I need to move this. So I just had to shift that binding. I actually had to shift it to the right a little bit, and as I said, I was just checking that none of the joins were happening on a seam, and I've managed to do that second time round. So I've just pinned that. That's my dry run, if you like, and I'm going to leave those two pins there, but it's not helpful to have it pinned. So I'm going to take the pins out. That was just for positioning, but I'm going to keep those first two pins in, and I'm going to start sewing somewhere over here. And that's going to give me room to work at the end to join those seams. I'm going to join them this time as well with a mitered seam. So let's go to the machine. Now I've decided I've got 2.5 inch wide binding, and I know I can do a 3/8 of an inch seam on this, and I am one that stitches from the top and then I'll turn it over and hand stitch it down on the back. And I know even with a 3/8 of an inch seam, I will have enough fabric to come around the back and cover those seams, those stitches on the back. But you can do a normal 1/4 of an inch seam if you like. It's pure preference. But I'm just going to go for a slightly wider, and particularly because I haven't got another border, I've just got sort of the background fabric. I think having just a slightly bigger binding will look nice. I think I might have done 3/8 on the last one. If I'm doing 2.5 inch, I tend to do 3/8. If I'm doing 2.25 inch binding, I'll do the 1/4 of an inch seam. Hope that made sense. Perfect. So on this machine, I've altered the stitch width because on a straight stitch on this machine, that moves the needle. And I'm at 6.5 on the stitch width. So that's the stitch that looks like a little ziggy-zaggy. And my stitch length, which is the little straight stitch icons on your machine, I've taken to a 2.4 because I'm going through wadding. So I normally piece in a 2.0, but we want something that's a little bit bigger because we've got the depth of the wadding to take into consideration. Let me grab a ruler because I'm going to need that to mark my stopping point. So as I said, I'm going to leave myself a nice long tail to work with, and we're going to go round with my 3/8 of an inch seam. Like I say, if you want to do a 1/4, do a 1/4. I'll show you the first corner like we did on the map, but I'll show you here on the machine how I do it, and then I'll probably just sit and sew, and I'll probably get put into fast forward mode while we do that, because then I need to show you how to make your corners on the back. Okay, so here we go. Now, as I get to this corner, I'm going to stop and I'm going to mark my 3/8. Now, if I'm doing a 1/4 inch on my machine at home, I've got a 1/4 inch mark on my foot that I can use. But because I'm doing 3/8, I haven't got that. So I need to mark, and it's 3/8 from the edge. So whatever your seam allowance is, that's the distance you need to stop from the edge of your quilt. So that for me is there. So it's right at the base of that witch's shoe. I love this fabric. I can just see that, which is right there. I'm going to sew up to that line, back stitch a couple of stitches and cut my thread. Now, like I showed you on the mat, we're going to take that, and this is why we don't want it pinned to the runner. Let me just trim those. I'm going to take that straight up, so everything here is in a straight line. We've got our nice 45-degree angle there. Then I'm going to bring the strip down, and I keep my thumb on that bit underneath, and just put that one into place, fold it. So look for our match points. Those two need to be right on top of each other. That folded edge needs to be there, and that raw edge needs to be there. And once I've got it there, I grab a clip or a pin and I pin it. And then we're going to sew again. Now I start a little way back in, go back a couple of stitches and then come forward. So I'm going to do the same. So we get 4 practices at doing our corners here with that. I shall just sit here and get this down, and then I'll show you how to do the corners on the back. Now I've gone a stitch too far there, so let me just show you that. And I can tell that, and this would give me a funky corner in a minute, because when I do that, let me just show you that, you can see my fabric is overhanging here, and that means I've come too far. So I'm just going to unpick two stitches, I think is all it's going to be. There we are. So that was a good problem to have, because it just shows one where it can go wrong. So there now, you can see that's more in a line. Before, this bit of binding was too far over. So all I've done, like I say, is just unpicked two stitches there. So sometimes small margins make a big difference. So it meant that these two bits weren't lining up, and this was overhanging. So I would definitely have had problems folding that corner on the back if I'd left it like that. Now I'm going to stop there to give myself lots of room to work. So I've gone round my four corners, and here I've got my nice overlap. So the rule of thumb is, however wide your binding is unfolded, that's how much you need to overlap these two fabrics. Now I'm going to choose where that overlap is going to be based on sort of how much of each of these fabrics I want to see. And I'm going to sort of do something about there-ish, I think. There-ish. It's technical, isn't it? So I'm going to cut this underneath one. And that's basically, I'm taking about no, that's not a rotary cutter, Jeanette, 6.5 inches off. So there's that bit there. So this piece now needs to overlap that piece by the width of the binding. Now some people just take that piece of binding and sort of lay it on top, and then that's the width. So that's a nice, easy way of doing it. I tend to be a ruler girl. I tend to measure. So I'm just going to lay one on top of the other, and I can see that's ended there. So the width of my binding is 2.5. So I'm just going to put my line, 2.5 inch line, lining up. Let me put that under the close-up. Shimmy it along. I don't know why it needed that noise. So there's my 2.5 line. You can see my orange fabric underneath and that line. So that is 2.5 right there. Now I'm just going to cut slightly on the inside of that. I think I said in the last Scrappy binding, there's something about binding where you just end up with just like that last stitch. There's like an extra tiny bit of fabric. And I'm literally just coming in by a tiny, tiny amount. So that's our overlap. And that's just a smidge under 2.5 inches. Now we could do what we did before in terms of having that laid one on top of the other. Now what I tend to do if I'm going to do it like that is just pin it just to make sure that I haven't put a twist when I've done that. But I tend to, and this is where this comes into its own, because I don't have to worry about checking for twists and all the rest of it, because what I'm going to do on this is just, sorry, I've got a bit fast forward there, but do exactly the same, where you put the two fabrics one on top of the other, draw the line, and then sew along that line. But like I say, do check before you sew that you haven't twisted. So I'm going to just use my mitre. So that one, and remember our rule of thumb, is that these need to look the same for the angles to meet. So this one also right side up, and we're cutting it at 2.5 because that was the width of the binding. But honestly, every time I do binding, I grab for that now. It's just made binding so simple. I've tried all the things, you know, the binding tools and all sorts where you overlap by 10 inches, and that didn't figure out in my head at all, but that is brilliant. Love it. And then we're going to put this, like we did before, one on top of the other. Now, actually, if I put the pins that way, I can also check that I haven't put a twist in this. When we sew, yeah, the folds are this side, so that's fine. So we can take that back to the, I nearly said iron then, sewing machine. We don't sew on an iron, 1/4 of an inch. Okay. Oh. Now I'm just going to check that I haven't twisted it, bringing it to the machine. I don't think I did because I pinned, but you can see now that fits perfectly onto that bit of fabric that's left. So I'm going to just finger press this open now. If you want to, you can take that to the iron. I tend to just finger press it down. I tend to find that that holds it flat enough. And then we're just going to finish this seam. So remember now, we need to go back to our 3/8. Oh, wrong way. So my zigzags were at 6.5 and my stitch length was at 2.4. So there it is, all sewn down. Now let me just clear away all my mess. And then the other thing I was asked, or requested from the last Scrappy Binding tutorial was, can I show you how to do the corners? So let's have a go at that one here now. So I'm just going to flip this over. Now at home I use the binding clips. I find those nice and easy. Now there's two things you sort of need to do. I tend to sort of get rid of any long threads off the sides and where we've sort of stopped and started. And what I tend to do is get my clips out and I bring the binding round and go all the way now, particularly on a corner. Now, one other thing just to say while we're talking about corners is make sure that you don't go what I call go thin at the corners, because what happens sometimes when we're sewing is when we get to a corner, our 1/4 of an inch can start to narrow. And that will also then end up with a funky corner. So try to make sure that you stay at that 1/4 of an inch and you don't end up sort of going thin on it, because that will affect it. So all we're going to do here is I'm going to grab a couple of, I'm just going to pull that fabric and wrap it round. It only just covers the stitches. Now let me just put a couple of pins to get us started. And I'm just going to fold that round. Now at home I might have used a black thread to sew it on, but to be honest you don't really see it, so it's not the end of the world. Now when you come to a corner, let me put it under the close-up because we're getting there, you sort of do the same in reverse. Now quite often you'll find there's a bit of a bulk there because you've got quite a lot happening, but you want this to come along, and if you sort of give that a bit of a pull, so that's coming out at a 45 degree, and then you should just be able to fold that down and it should meet there. Now, black on black, I know it's hard to see, but that meets there. Now, I can feel under there's quite a lot of bulk because we've got all of that wadding. So sometimes what I do is I will just take my scissor, and you just want to take literally just that tiny little bit of wadding away. Don't take away too much because then you'll end up with nothing in your corners and your corners will be a bit floppy. But take a bit away, because if you need to take a little bit more for it to lay flatter, you can take a little bit more. Like I say, you can always take a bit more away, but you can't put it back once it's gone. So we're going to do that again. I'm just going to sort of pull on this bit of fabric here, so all of that comes out in a nice straight line, and then I'm just going to fold it And it's hard to do it without my fingers being in the way, but let me see if I can get a clip on it. And put it under the close-up, but you can sort of see there where those two orange bits are meeting, that's where my mitre is, and that is the edge of that piece of fabric there. So, but like I say, sometimes you have to take away just a little bit of that bulk for that to happen. But if you've got your mitre on the front, that should happen quite easily, she said. It's easy when you know how, isn't it? Okay, now just while we're doing that, let me just show you what I do when it comes to my corners on hand sewing. We'll just do a very quick, sorry, because I don't want this to be too long, but I've got thread which matches both the binding. Now this mostly will be black, but I might change to an orange where I've got my orange bits. But I just do a slip stitch, and if I just start back here so we don't have a lot, I tend to start by sort of going in and coming out on that seam. And I'm just going to put my clip back there so it's holding it. And I'm just going to start, so I've got a knot in the end of that thread, and I'm just doing a slip stitch. So where that thread is coming out, I'm just going to put my needle in and come out right on the fold of the binding. Now with my first stitch, when I start a new thread, I tend to, you can either do a little stitch, a couple of stitches in place, but I tend to just do a little knot. So I've just taken the thread under, so my needle is going through, and that's just secured that at the start. Now let me just do a few little slip stitches. So I'm taking my needle right out, right next to where it's, so horizontally, where it's in the binding, and I'm just catching that fold. So I'm just quickly going to, this is the best bit for me. I can sit there in the evenings with a film on or something, and I will just sit and slip stitch binding down. It's just whiz to the corner, and then I'll show you how I stitch my corners. Now there may be people out there that will shout at the screen and say, Jeanette, that's not how you're supposed to do it. But I'll show you how I do it and let you decide. But you can see with that 3/8 of seam, I've still got enough that I can cover the stitching. I stitch quite small for you, so it takes me a little while to get round, but this is the best bit. One, because I love the hand stitching, and two, because your quilt's nearly finished. It's like, this is great, it's going to look fab. Now I'm just going to hold that there for a minute, but we can fold it again just to make sure that everything's in place here. Now I can just see a little bit of orange thread poking out from there. I don't know where you're coming from, but I'm just going to snip you away. And make sure you're going in a straight line. Make sure even now at the corner you're not pushing too much fabric over into that corner. Keep everything nice and parallel. And then I stitch, make sure your needle's not going through to the front as well. Just catch this back layer. And then I stitch into where the seam allowance is. And then at my corners, I do an extra little knot, and I do a square knot. So one piece of fabric goes under, and you've probably seen me do this in English paper piecing, and the other piece of thread goes the other way. But you could just take your needle through, and I just make a little knot there. For me, it just, you know, if anything comes undone, it's only ever going to travel back as far as where I've sort of knotted it off. So that makes sense. Now when I come to do the corner here now, we should just be able to fold that down. There's my clip. And let's just clip over here, because that will help hold it back there. So I've got a couple of clips there. And sometimes you do just have to fiddle with that angle there so that the fabric, but if I put that right in the middle under the close-up, you can see there my corner's coming right out at my corner. So I will take my needle and I come out just a little bit back from that corner. And then I can sort of stitch into that corner. Does that make sense? And then I know my corner's held nice and securely. And then I will carry on from there Let me just do 3 or 4 stitches to get beyond, and then you can see what my corner's looking like. There we are, that will do. I'll leave that thread in because then I'll just carry on with that later when I get home. So let me put that in under the close-up. You can see there how my corner is looking there. So we've got a nice mitre there. And if we turn it over on the front, we've got a nice mitre there. So I hope that helps. I hope that's covered, sorry, a little bit longer tutorial. But hopefully there was enough information there to show all the elements about getting the corners on the back, not just folding it, but then how I stitch it down and make sure that that's all staying, because sometimes it can move when you're stitching as well. And it is about, you know, trying to keep everything consistent and being as accurate as you can. Like I say, in sewing, there's some places where we don't need the accuracy and some places where we do, because it's the next step then that's important if we haven't been accurate in the step before. So you can begin to see there how this is going to look, and I think it's going to look lovely on my little unit in my lounge. I'll probably get this finished by the end of today. And then I've got the month of October to enjoy it, haven't I? So there we are, pinwheel pumpkins, scrappy binding. Hope you give it a go. If you do, please do share your photos with us. I had some lovely ladies come up to me recently at a quilt exhibition showing me some of the bits they'd made from the tutorial, and it just made my day. It absolutely made my day. So thank you very much for sharing that with me, either through photos or in this instance in real life. So thank you very much. And I didn't get the lady's name, and I wish I had now, but hopefully I'll meet her again and she'll say it was me. So thanks ever so much. If you've enjoyed this, do like, comment, share, subscribe, all those wonderful things that help support us here. And I hope you'll join us again here next time in the sewing studio.